My mother was a social worker and she saw clients in our house, and I used to eavesdrop on the sessions. So I think I've always been very interested in people and people's stories and telling intimate sort of details of people's lives. And you can see a lot of that in Hightown. And that also is very key in how you run a writer's room and how you get the best work out of people. So, that's the most far-fetched example of what got me here. Actually, I moved to Los Angeles to go to graduate film school. I went to USC Film School. I wanted to be a writer-director. So I did sort of all the jobs when I was in graduate school. But my first paid job was I wrote coverage. I was a freelance coverage writer, so I would get a call at 7 p.m. and I would drive across town and pick up a book and try and write it up, and I got paid by the word. And you learn to very quickly know what you like and assess other people's writing. And then I was a PA in reality television. And then I was a post PA, and then I was an assistant to a physical production executive. And then I became an assistant to a showrunner. And that was sort of my entree into scripted television.
I got to tell you that I sat down to watch the show thinking, there's nothing here that pulls me in, just from the description I heard. And then I sat down, and within 5 minutes, I was hooked, because your characters are the characters of the real world. They're not these one-dimensional projections of what we think people should be. How did you create this show? How did it come about?
I think many of the themes were themes that I have worked on in many other pieces. Certainly addiction and recovery are important to me. Sort of female sexuality and this idea of a woman sort of trying to save herself through the solving of a crime or going on a journey with a mystery. So those are sort of elements, but I think the real sort of spark for this iteration was just the character of Jackie really just came to me in a flash. My father-in-law was a fishery service agent in Cape Cod, so I knew that job, and I know Provincetown very well. I've been going there my whole life. But the idea of this year-rounder lesbian, very tough with this specific job, sort of a party girl, kind of reaching the end of the party. I saw her and I knew it, and I knew that was a character I wanted to write. And it just, everything kind of blossomed from there.
So let's talk about the breaking of stereotypes. Your depiction, I think, is a much more realistic one, that women, just like men, have drives. How easy was that to be accepted as a character? Did you have to fight for her?
Everybody, I wrote it as a spec on my own, and everybody that's come across the script, I'm sure there was plenty of people that didn't like it, and so they didn't buy it. But when Christiane Reed at JBTV read it, she said, I stood on my chair and said, we have to make this. And then, Starz felt the same way. So I think the people who love it and recognize it, love it and recognize it. And then other people, I have made the mistake of reading all the comments on, and it's very eye-opening, because the people who love it, and the people who it's not for them, there's too much sex, or there's, oh, it's so lesbian, and you just, okay, well, it's not for you. It's not for you. But if you recognize yourself in it, wonderful.
And what I really liked about it was that regardless of who you're concentrating on, if it's a gay woman, a woman who has other choices in her sexuality, a man, a policeman, they all are people that you relate to as people, and not as examples of masculinity, a job, etc. Where does that come from? Because that's not easy to do.
I don't know. I think obviously I relate, or not obviously, I do relate sort of to the darker side of life, or I guess just the more flawed side of life. I think in my 20s, I was very much like Jackie in the sort of plowing through people, just selfishly. And I think Ray has elements of that. And everybody has an agenda, and but everyone also, you know, nobody is just one thing. Everybody, you know, you can be selfish and wanting to help somebody else, you know, and these things coexist. You know, there's a lot more and than either or in all of us. So I think, you know, the idea that Jackie sleeps around and she's scared of intimacy, and therefore most of her close relationships are with men, because that's less scary for her, that's less intimate in a way. So as soon as you sort of open up those possibilities to all your characters, you can have such rich portrayals of people that feel more real, instead of just trying to say, I mean, Ray is at once a terrible cop, and he believes he's doing the right thing, and the ends justify the means. And I think you can see both of those things simultaneously in the character, and I think you can enjoy the sort of richness of that.
The other thing I liked was how it deals with the very real issue of the opioid challenge that has just decimated America. Why did you choose to write about it?
I'm from Massachusetts, and my husband's from Cape Cod, and I've been going to Cape Cod my whole life. And I think it's just sort of random that I happened to start hearing about the opioid crisis through Cape Cod. I think it was happening all over the country already at the point that I started to hear about it, but because I have relatives there, I have a relative who works at Cape Cod Hospital, I was starting to hear sort of anecdotally about how the whole culture was changing on Cape Cod. And my husband was telling me all these kids that I went to high school with are dying. And there was just, the property crime was going up. Babies were being born addicted. I mean, these things were happening, and I was hearing about them in connection to Cape Cod. And so I think that was what was in the back of my mind. It wasn't that it was only happening on Cape Cod. It just happened to be my into it, and it happens to be a place that I love so deeply. So I think when I was going to write a story, all these elements were there. But you know, I knew I wanted to write a crime drama. I've always written crime. I knew I wanted to write a sort of narcotics thing, a little bit of an ode to The Wire. And so, you know, opiates, that is the au courant thing. These things are cyclical, and that is what it was when I was writing it. So it had to be that, really.
Do you think a story like this, led by someone like you, could have happened in another era?
Probably not. And I think the response that I've gotten is that it feels, even though so much has changed in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, it still feels very new. So I don't think, I mean, and certainly, you know, I don't know how you feel about the term female antihero, but I mean, certainly we had male antiheroes first, the sort of Tony Soprano era. And I think Jackie does come a little bit in that lineage, from that lineage. So I suppose we had to have anti-heroes before we could have, or we chose to have male anti-heroes before we ended up having a female anti-hero. So no, I think it is certainly a product of its time and some changes. And there's certainly like things, as you'll get deeper in the season, you'll see there's definitely some sort of things that were influenced by Me Too. So I think it's of its time, but I think we're ready.